Okay. I'm going to say a few words about background about writing the theory of organizations before I get on to an old man's rant about the present. Um, as you probably know, the theory of organizations was basically my PhD, and amazingly, when it was published, it sold very well and went into a number of translations. And here are sort of three books that sort of came out of it, not by me, but by other people. So in the 70s, I think it was, Derek Pugh and David Hickson included me in their book, Great Writers and Organizations. And I was delighted to find myself my picture is at the very top of the jacket. And I had a nice joke with Stuart because his picture appeared on the back of the cover. That was the 70s. And then, as some of you know, John Hazard and Martin Parker kindly organized a conference at Kiel in 1991 to mark the 20th anniversary of the book. And out of that conference came the middle jacket you can see there, the book, Towards a New Theory of Organizations. And then, to my great amazement, in 2013, I think it was, I had a chapter on the theory of organizations written about me on this book called On the Shoulders of Giants. I'm fairly tall, but I never see myself as a giant, by Tommy Jensen and Timothy, and I can't read the name, Wilson, it looks like. So there have been several publications about the book. I want to talk briefly about going back to the time when it actually came out. I mean, this conference, as you know, is the 50th anniversary. I don't know if we'll get to a diamond anniversary or even if I'll still be around and get my telegram from the Queen, which we're supposed to get when we have diamond anniversaries. But let me talk a bit about the writing of it. My PhD, if you don't know, as I said, it was based on the theory of organizations, and it was almost a disaster because the first draft of the book, which was my PhD, was almost failed, and quite rightly so. It was terrible. And the external examiner, Tom Burns, apparently saved my bacon. He'd come down intending to fail it, but on the strength of my defense of it, allowed me to have another go. And I got 3 or 4 closely typed pages of comments on my thesis. I didn't know you could have comments on your thesis. My supervisors had just told me it was brilliant, the first draft, changed a comma or full stop, and I'm pretty good at punctuation. And so I had no supervision. So anything of value in the second draft, well, a lot of value in the second draft, comes from the great Tom Burns, who I later insulted quite unintentionally by writing a bad review of his book on Irving Goffman. I'd quite forgotten he'd been my external who'd saved my bacon, and I felt forever guilty about that. So it was Tom Burns who saved my day. And as you know, a lot of you weren't around in the 60s, but at that time, dominant in sociological theory and in organizational theory was Parsons and functionalism, and the book was a critique of that. And I'd started to read Weber and Schutz, and I was very concerned with analyzing organizations in terms of everyday practices. And I also, something that stays with me today is that I wanted to treat organizational members, and all of us as members, not as dopes. And it seems to me that actually hasn't had much effect, because it seems to be in a lot of qualitative research, which I'm now concerned with and writing about, people still get treated as dope. So if you look at interview studies, the impression you get from most researchers, it's the interviewer who is the skilled person, and the member is just a collection, the interviewee is just a collection of perceptions which the skillful interviewer is going to elicit. And there's very little suggestion and a great deal of interview research about the great skills of the interviewers, interviewees in telling the stories that they do. The final problem, among many problems of the theory of organizations looking back at it, was that there basically was no methodology. There was a chapter on methodology, but it was rubbish. And basically the reason for that was that I hadn't done any research when I wrote the theory of organization. So how could I write about methodology sensibly? The rest of what I'm going to say by way of introduction is, as I suggested already, an old man's rant, but I don't know whether this chap is an old man, but Dennis Tourish from Northern Ireland, I don't know if you've come across his paper, which was kindly sent to me by Barbara Czarniowska. His paper is called The Triumph of Nonsense in Management Studies, and he talks about the way in which in management and organization studies today, we get a great deal of pretentious and long-winded prose, which creates the illusion of theory development. And so the rant is about the way in which, on a very non-random reading of a number of organizations journals, I came across what I see as many trendy theories, but very weak data analysis. This reading was done in the hope of a joint publication, firstly with Stuart Clegg and then with Barbara Czarniowska. And for various reasons, this came to nothing. But maybe since both are around today, maybe we can come back to that at some point if they see any value in what I have to say. So what do you get in so many organization studies journals? You get big literature reviews. And this, in a way, substitutes for theory or counts as the theory. And as Tourish points out, and I agree with him, a lot of these literature reviews are quite lengthy and quite pointless. So to use a term from C. Wright Mills, and this takes us back to the 1950s, you see how old I am, what you get in these journals is what C. Wright Mills called grand theory, and he had in mind talk at Parsons. And Mills, as you know, saw grand theory as opposed to what he called abstracted empiricism, which was like sort of survey research, which had no theory. Unfortunately, it seemed to me on my non-random reading of organization studies journals, you got both. So you got these big theories coupled with abstracted empiricism. And by that I mean you got flimsy, poorly analyzed data, despite all the big names that have been cited. And so another way of looking at what I found in these journals was what I call fancy journalism. So the data analysis was journalistic, as I'll try and demonstrate in a minute, but it was fancy because the writers referred to theorists that no good journalist would ever refer to. So Tourish again makes my point, and I'll let you read that slide. And I want to give you a few examples of what I have in mind here. These are just a few papers from recent papers in organizational studies. So one of these papers was called Obedience in Organization. So here's the trendy theorist here is Heidegger and Heidegger's discussion of mood. And what is the methodology? You get a few quotes from key informants. So you get journalism coupled with big theories. Or here's a second example, a paper on the underrepresentation of women in organizations. So you get this heavy theory at the start, feminist, psychoanalytical, post-structuralist theories. But what is the data analysis? Firstly, it's interview data. How is it analyzed? The most conventional way of analyzing interview data, and to me, although it's very commonly used in qualitative research, I don't buy into it, because we can all find themes. To me, it's a common sense skill to find themes in what interviewees say. It's not an analytic skill, and appeals to the most conventional methodologist, Creswell. So again, big theory and dodgy methodology. A few more examples. A paper on project management. Here we get existential hermeneutic phenomenology. Poor Husserl, I think, would be turning in his grave, as would Heidegger, although I got less sympathy for Heidegger given what he was up to. You got that supported by a few interview quotes. Big theory, dodgy methodology. Another paper on professional service firms. Here we get the trendy French theory, we get Foucault being used. What is the data analysis? Again, it's thematic, the most conventional data analysis, one of the most conventional you can have. My final example from a paper I only came across a few days ago, because ResearchGate sent it to me, because unfortunately I was cited in it, and you see why the unfortunate comes up. This is a real peach. Can you believe this? It's about finding Heideggerian structures of being within the nurse-patient relationship. This to me is, you know, you couldn't get worse than this. And here is one of the statements they make. Dasein was enhanced when nurses had first-hand experience with the phenomenon. So poor old Heidegger, well, we shouldn't feel so sorry for Heidegger the Nazi, but poor old Heidegger is being reduced to variable analysis. If that doesn't make him turn in his grave, God knows what will. And here's the quote, if you want to, here's the journal in which it appeared. I blame journal editors for publishing this rubbish, unless these journal editors actually believe in these kinds of things. Okay, I'm coming to the end of this rant. I want to talk a bit more about what the poor methodology. I've given you examples of the theory and hinted at the poor methodology. Here's another example, a study of women in academia. And the claim that this article makes. Okay, what is the evidence for this claim? Journalistically, the researcher pulls out a quote from an interviewee that fits whatever it is that the writer wants to claim. Yeah, we can all do this. We can all find quotes in our research that supports our hypothesis. Where is the evidence that the researcher has gone through their data set as a whole, looking for things that don't fit what it is they want to claim? Where is the evidence that the researcher has paid attention to the skills of the interviewee in terms of shaping what they say to fit what they've been told the researcher is looking for? And sometimes, still worse, you get claims without data. So you don't even get a transcript of what the interviewee has said and what the interviewer has asked. You just get a roundup where the researcher just tells you what was in the interviewee's statements, as you find here, a common theme. There's no data here for you to form a contrary opinion. Why is this going on? When I put this argument to students, PhD students that I'm teaching workshops to in qualitative research, they sometimes say, and this is a reasonable claim, that if you're writing a journal article, you don't have much space to give very, very much data. And I can understand that when often we're reduced to, say, 6,000 words, we haven't got much space. Well, we could create space by not having all these nonsensical literature reviews. We can also use what little space we have to deal in detail with one long data extract to show how we've induced the hypothesis from that data extract, which would include what we're doing as an interviewer, if we're using interview data, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And we can combine that with some kind of analysis of our data set as a whole, even involving simple counting mechanisms, as I've used on some qualitative data, to try and find deviant cases. So I don't buy into this argument that we can't have detailed data analysis because there's no space in journal articles. Certainly, it's true that there's an overvaluation of textbook theory in so much published qualitative research. And there's a failure in so much work that's published to treat theory as emergent, not as something we find at the beginning and the end of a journal article, but something that we're actually engaged in our data analysis. If we're working inductively, this is what we should be doing. So a number of neglected issues, and here come on to my newfound role in the last 20 years as a methodologist, almost total avoidance in the journal articles that I looked at naturalistic data. To me, naturalistic data is where qualitative research is strongest. the quants can do interviews and often do them better than we do. Why is naturalistic data almost totally ignored? I did some survey of various journals, not just in organizations, but elsewhere. And I found 9 out of 10, by and large, of the articles they published use non-naturalistic data. Jonathan Potter talks about the dead social scientist test. Well, I'm aging. Some of us also in this group are aging. We think about mortality. What Potter means by this is more jokey. He's arguing that qualitative research is at its strongest when it works with data that would still be there if the researcher had got run over on the way to the office that morning. Okay, and that's true of digital data. It's true of naturalistic data within what people are actually doing. And it's true of documents and so on. Why do we call documents secondary data? What nonsense is that? As if we can't, and Lindsay Pryor has made some very good points about that. And I hope I don't know if Lindsay, you're around at the moment, but you'll be talking about that, I hope, in a minute. Other neglected issues, studying sequences of interaction. That's what I was talking about. If we want to use interview data, why do we cut out what the interviewer is doing? And Jay Gubrium, who'll be speaking later, he's probably asleep now because he's in the States, has written some marvelous stuff on analyzing the sequence of talk between interviewer and interviewee in the way in which they go about together constructing a narrative or story. What is also absent is rigorous analysis based upon analyzing deviant cases. And what is absent in so much of this is studying behavior, what people are doing, including the narrative practice in constructing a story within an interview. And finally, and I'm going to stop with this, I'm going to end my rant here, what is absent throughout all of these things is what might be called, going back to my Schutzian theme in the theory of organizations, is lay theorizing. How participants are constructing skillful versions of reality. And I'm helped by Tourish yet again. We need to be astonished afresh by the ordinary, for the ordinary is not ordinary at all. In my very short book on qualitative research, I talked about how qualitative research is at its strongest when it shows the extraordinary features of ordinary life. And again, that's something that I find totally missing in these journalistic yet grand theory journal articles that I've looked at. So I leave it over to you. Have the articles I've looked at been unrepresentative? No doubt they are, and I'm sure you're doing very different kind of work. Please make me feel better about what's going on in organization theory in terms of theory construction and data. So I'm going to stop sharing there.